Well, welcome. We're excited to have you join us today for this important topic and one that I'm very excited about because I know as a former principal, trying to figure it how to work everything in and still be able to support your teachers and provide them with feedback and help them in their growth is always on our mind, but not always a possibility. So we're glad that you're here. I am Kim Tunnell. I am the Vice President of Education Operational Services for Education Advanced. And we have two special guests here as well. So I'm going to introduce them in just a second. We'll have a live Q&A at the end and allow you to submit some questions. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started with the session today on daily teacher growth and how we can support principals in going through that. We've got two topics that we're going to address. Our agenda is how to nurture growth, and then what are some practical ideas for some daily tasks, and then we'll finish up the webinar with a live Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two esteemed guests this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you live. Dr. Diana Whitlock and Christina Larsen. And I'm just going to let them share a little bit about themselves and where they're from. And then we'll get started with our first guiding question. So Dr. Whitlock, share a little bit about your background.
I'd be glad to. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank Kim for inviting me to be here today. It's always an honor to speak to educators and have good conversation about giving feedback to educators and to really all employees. As Dr. Tunnell said, I was part of the team that was involved in creating the teacher evaluation software that EAI now houses. And one of the things that we really wanted to stress with that is how can we make it a good, positive experience for teachers? So we did some research on what was working out there and put that together into the book Teacher Evaluation as a Growth Process. And it is available on Amazon. I think it's even in Kindle now. So it's a pretty light read, but it's to help educators get started in giving feedback to teachers. So
yes, it's a wonderful, easy read, but lots of great strategies and content. So, and Christina Larsen is in Highline Public Schools. And Christina, tell us a little bit about your background.
And thank you. Thank you as well for the invitation to participate in this event. So I am located in Highline Public Schools, which surrounds SeaTac Airport. So every little city and community that surrounds our major international airport here in Washington, that's where all of our students attend schools. And it's always been a challenge in terms of as the airport expanded and impacted our district. I grew up here. I was born to teachers. I have attended Highline schools and I have worked for Highline schools. I was a teacher. I was a 15-year principal, and then I was invited to come to human resources. So that's a little bit about my background. And while I love going around and learning about how other places do it, I haven't had a lot of experience in working in those other places. So I'm interested to always participate in opportunities that spreads knowledge across the country and hear back from those same people.
Absolutely. And Highline is a very well-respected, well-regarded district for the great things that you're doing there. So we appreciate you taking the time. Okay, we're going to get started with our very first guiding question, which is what are some ideas to create a culture of nurturing teacher growth on your campus? So I don't know, Christina, if you want to start off and just share some of the things that you're doing on Highline and on fostering that culture.
Sure, thank you. So walking way back, really nurturing teacher growth is dependent upon trust and transparency. And the trust is needed because what I found in our schools that are most successful in terms of creating a culture of growth on their campus are those schools where where practice is open for anyone to see. Teachers to observe each other, teachers to share ideas and take risks and challenges with each other. And so you really have to build that foundation of trust. And it can be really tempting to want to jump into things before that's well established, but taking the time to make sure that you establish that trust. And part of that is making sure that everybody's on the same page. What are your common goals for a school in terms of instructional practice? And how are we going to measure and constantly circle back and look at those at the progress we've made toward implementation practice? Oftentimes we focus on the outcome of our implementation and whether we're achieving great things with kids. But if we don't take the time to make sure that we know what implementation and excellent implementation looks like and build that common understanding, and then be able to open our practice to each other to see if we're actually moving all in the same direction, so that we have not only the common understanding, but our practice actually looks similar to each other in terms of what fulfillment of that defined common understanding looks like. It breaks down and you don't actually get that transparency that you need. And so it takes time. So trust and time really are some two foundational pieces. And it's those schools that have invested that time and haven't felt pressured, maybe by even their supervisors, to move it along faster. They, in the end, are actually the most successful in building really strong collaborative staffs who continue to grow and grow and grow in their practice.
Great. Diana, what would you like to add?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yes, I totally agree. And that was very, very well said with the trust piece of that. And one of the things I really liked when I looked at the PowerPoint, when I'm hearing here, is the culture. That trust and building that culture is essential. I think back to when I was teaching and even when I was a principal, and any kind of teacher evaluation or any kind of teacher feedback was really either punitive in nature, or it was a compliance exercise. It was, oh yeah, I've got to evaluate this teacher 4 times. Okay, check. I've done my 4, I'm done. And we really needed to move beyond that. And again, I agree, Highline's doing an excellent job. A lot of schools are doing great things with that, and Highline has got it. They're really doing a fantastic job with moving into a more of a growth process with that. And I think when we moved from and I've even given some presentations with colleagues about moving beyond compliance. This is not just a once a year compliance exercise. This really has to be about working with the teacher and helping them set their goals, and how do we get better? How do we all get better as a staff? The other thing, we don't want it to be a compliance exercise. We also don't want it to be that gotcha. That, oh yeah, I'm coming into your room tomorrow, you better be on your A game. No, we need to see everything that's going on. We need to see what's happening. What do you need a little help with? And likewise, what are you doing really, really well that maybe someone else can observe, and we can all work together to kind of nurture this. One of my favorite quotes, and I wish I could take credit from it, but it came from one of my colleagues. It says, the goal is to do teacher evaluation with the teacher and not to the teacher. And I think that's really key when you start talking about that culture piece, as far as this is not a gotcha. This is not a quick exercise and I'll see you again in a year. This needs to be a whole picture of what's going on in your classroom and what can we do to maybe make that a little bit better, or maybe make it a little easier on you as a teacher too. There might be some ideas that we could share, but absolutely the culture piece is huge, whether, as a building principal, as a teacher, some of those different roles that I've served as an educator, that is a huge piece, the trust and the building the culture. I completely agree.
Yeah, I reflect back to trying to create that culture as a new principal and build those relationships. And, it's one thing, like you mentioned, Christina, trying to set the culture, but not going too fast and just being present and available in the classrooms and visiting with each teacher individually. I remember I had a list of all my staff members, and I would just check them off to make sure that I was making connections each week. Because sometimes you lose track of, okay, now who haven't I connected with? So I think that's really important to build that trust and create that transparency. The other thing I found was that having a focus on students takes that light off of the teacher. So it's not like you mentioned, Diana, about a gotcha, or I'm coming in to see what you're doing. I'm coming in to see what the students are doing, and then how can I help support you in reaching those students. And so anytime that you can use student work or student examples, student behavior, I think I know our brand new teachers, when I was in charge of teacher induction, always said it kind of takes that anxiety away of, oh, they're not necessarily looking at me. It's about the learning that's happening and not my actual teaching. And that kind of helps foster that growth as well. So
I agree. And I think anytime you can make that, it's good to have that presence in a non-evaluative manner too, like you're talking about. I know one of the schools where I was a principal, we did a student of the week, and I made sure on Fridays that I delivered those by hand, because that got me into every classroom, at least for something positive, once a week. If nothing else, I at least got in every classroom once a week and recognized a student. And then that way, it's not just that threatening presence only. You're in there for other things too.
Yeah, that's always.
I think connected to that is, and I think you both touched on this, is the communication of that you value your adults. You value your adults. They have positive things to bring to students, positive things to bring to the community. And you are showing that you trust them in their judgment. And you can really see a difference where teachers have worked in an environment where they aren't being trusted to make the right kinds of decisions. And then it inhibits their ability to take risks. And so the more that you can communicate that you trust them, and you might provide some guidance to them, which might come in our later question, but you might provide some guidance to them, but you trust them. You trust them. Remember what's important, that they can make good decisions.
Yes,
Absolutely.
that's
Great.
Very critical. And I think from the practical standpoint of creating that culture, that visibility and being out and about, I know as a principal, and then even as when I was superintendent, I would block out. As superintendent, it was Thursday mornings, and Thursday mornings, my secretary knew, don't schedule any appointments unless there's a major fire somewhere that needs to be put out. I'm going to be on campuses and in classrooms. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do in that principal seat, because you've got parents and you've got staff, but blocking out amounts of time to be visible, be in classrooms, build that trust, and supporting your teachers is very, very important. I don't know, Christina and Diana, if you had any other tips for individual principals for that.
Christina, why don't you start, because you're a practitioner still in the schools, so you probably have more. So I'll let you lead that one, then I'll throw my 2 cents in.
So additional, in terms of just continuing to build those relationships, coming across as being very authentic, being consistent, and inviting critique of when they see, not necessarily public critique. You want to demonstrate the appropriate way to critique, but I actually had when I first became a principal at my second school, I said, this is what I'm about. And when I'm inconsistent with that, I want you to call me out. And I was fairly consistent, but I think it was like my fourth year, I had one of my kindergarten teachers come to me and say, you said, this, and this. And when you did this, it seemed like that wasn't adhering to the things that you say that you value. And I thanked her. And I had to actually confess to my whole staff, like, Lisa called me out on this. You probably all saw this happening too. And this was the rationale I had rationalized for myself why I would behave in this certain way, which might seem incongruent, but they couldn't necessarily know the background information. But in the end, it wasn't the right decision. Sometimes it might be the right decision and you have to say, and you don't get to know the rest, but in this case, it wasn't the right decision. So thank you for doing what I asked you to do and call me out. And I think that sort of that we are in this together and we will grow together. You're not responsible for the success of that building. You're responsible for helping those who are on your team to make sure that those students can be successful. I'm responsible as a leader for my adults. My adults are responsible for my students. And when I'm doing my job well, my adults are doing their job well, and the students, we can see it in what they actually do. But too often I have experienced situations or have observed situations where somebody, the singleton person, the principal or the central office person, they actually try to do the leading of the building and making sure that those students grow without recognizing that that's not your job. Your job is the adults, so that the adults who are working directly with those students can actually thrive. I love the word thrive. And
very well said.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you also kind of along with that, you really need to know your staff. If you're a principal, you need to know your teachers. If you're a superintendent, it's key to know those principals. I mean, whoever your direct reports are, because, I know that I had similar to Christina, I had a young teacher one time share that she said, you really intimidate me. I don't think I'm an intimidating personality. And but to her, I was, and that was her reality. And so I had to work with nurturing that relationship to make sure that she was supported and that I was seen, again, in a non-threatening, non-intimidating way, because something about me hit her that way. So knowing that that was her reality, again, I appreciated her sharing that and appreciated her kind of calling me to say, obviously, we needed to work on that relationship. So, that was a priority for me. And that's just one example of those kinds of things that can happen.
Yeah, that's great. Relationships is what it comes down to.
It really does.
Yeah, it really does.
Yes.
Between the administrator and the teachers, and then teachers and the students. So,
yes.
okay.
Sure.
So let's move into our next question, which is, what are some of those practical strategies on a daily basis for promoting the growth of our teachers and other staff as well? But this is mostly focused on teachers. So what are some of those practical strategies that you guys have utilized and found successful? And
so one thing that, and I don't know if this would be a daily strategy, but being willing to go in and teach in a classroom and have the teacher observe me, and not so much as like I'm going to be able to be the best kindergarten teacher, because I was not a kindergarten teacher, but the idea that I want you to observe my practice and give me feedback based upon our shared understanding of this rubric that we've been working with. And so to help them develop a lens and give, and again, it's not something that I could do every day. I probably did it, once a month, but I would say that is a routine practice that can be really helpful. And then just making sure that I'm organized myself so that I can be planning ahead for those kinds of times, because your daily work as a principal gets so time consuming, and things that you weren't expecting just sucks it up. So making sure that you have a contingency plan where I will not be interrupted during this time. This is what you will do, and only if the building is burning down, will this get interrupted. So those priorities. I think another thing too is I think that it was said earlier, being in a classroom on a daily basis. I contrary to some popular beliefs that you should be in everybody's classroom, every single day or, every single week. It goes back to that trust. Like, I trust you. I will be in classrooms every single day, but I won't necessarily hit every single classroom every single week because I trust you to do your job. And, but it helps you become aware, and it's not necessarily a scheduled thing, but it makes you aware of the cadence of how that room and those students and those adults function when you're just popping in, and it might be a transition that isn't actually transition time. So how do they manage that, and why are they transitioning? And being a support and not being not critiquing something because you don't know the whole context of what's going on there, but also having those opportunities to say something positive. I am also not a note leaver. I don't like writing and leaving notes because, like, what happens when you go in and everything was a disaster? I'd rather, I like to circle back and just have a, brief conversation with somebody about things. And people do that differently. I'm not suggesting that that is the way to do it, but I just know myself, and I didn't necessarily care about getting notes, and so I have a hard time leaving them. And so I think that also goes back to knowing your staff, because if your staff, I learned some of my staff, they hung on having that note left. And while I couldn't really change who I was, I had to get really transparent about, do not freak out when I'm not leaving notes. This is what's going to happen. This is how I'm going to function with you. And if I could have changed my practice, I would have done it on their behalf. But I knew myself around the note leaving, and that was not something that was going to happen. So I think it's being true to yourself and also adapting to what your staff needs to the extent that you can be successful in doing that.
Yeah, that's great. Diana, what do you want to add?
Yeah, so I think when we go back to thinking about practical strategies, I think that transparency is still really key. Like, there shouldn't be any secrets as far as what good teaching looks like in the eyes of our district. Let's look at that, and whether it is through modeling or even looking at teaching videos, and okay, this might be an example of checks for understanding, but really keeping everybody on the same page as to what do we expect of each other and what do we expect as an administrative team. Certainly love the idea of scheduling, and that kind of goes back to that culture, because your secretary does have to be on board to not schedule you during that time. And if you're at the building level, teachers have to kind of have a plan B for discipline. Like, if it's my time to go evaluate, I don't have time to talk to the kid who didn't bring their homework again today. I need to go take care of this, and I will get to that later, or someone else can take on that role. But those are just some kind of management type strategies. But I think too, it's really important for leadership to be prepared, to be looking at the data and providing the supports needed. When especially at the central office level, you've got the data of every teacher in your district, and you see which teachers might be struggling in a skill, but this teacher over here is doing it really well. Perfect time for that partnership and that peer coaching and that, observation piece to go and see it. And as I really like what Christina said about everything being open for, suggestion, that is still our best PD, is when we can observe a colleague, or a colleague can help coach us to get better in something. Again, you have to know your staff, and you have to build this culture, because some people can get offended. But if that's the underlying culture, that this is what we do, we coach each other, we help each other, we provide this support and this feedback to each other, then that can be really, really successful in helping everyone continue to get better.
Yeah, and I think that providing that feedback to the individual teacher. I know in the state of Texas, they have, with their evaluation system, they have what's called reinforcement, which is I'm going to reinforce something that you're really doing well, and then refinement. Let's look at something that you would like to get better at, and let me, as the principal, help you in that. And it could be visiting another classroom. It could be, like you said, a video.
Mhm.
It could just be something that they've done, their goal setting, and they know that they want to refine a specific area. But that reinforcement is really, really important as well. And not that it's going to happen on a daily basis, but if that's in your mind as you're out and about in the hallways. And I used to have teachers when I was principal say, because I told them, I said, listen, if if I can't get things done in the office and there's things that have to happen, there are times when I just go, I need a break. And my break is always going to be in one of your rooms, just not, critiquing, but just enjoying
Mhm.
watching you lead kids. That was my happy place. And sometimes as a principal, we forget that the students and the teachers and what they're doing, the exciting things that are happening in the classroom get crowded out by all of the other politics and problems and reports and um, all of those things. So again, that goes back to enhancing the trust and the transparency. So
Absolutely. I
yeah,
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Christina, can you or Diana, either one, think of additional
Right.
strategies on promotion? I know induction is really important for new teachers, and then of course mentoring and coaching.
Yep.
And if you're blessed to have instructional coaches, that's an element of providing daily growth. But what about those campuses that don't have that funding source? How can the principal serve in that role?
I think that planning to partner, if you don't have an instructional coach that can also share in this work with you, and I would suggest if you do have an instructional coach, it's part of your responsibility as a building leader as well. But figure
Yes.
out, who am I going to partner with this year? And it's not always your most struggling teachers. You also want to partner with your teachers who are strong, and sometimes you go in and you think, what can I really do to help move this person's practice, because they're beyond where I ever was as a teacher. But that partner with a few people every single year, and different people. Help them, listen to them, getting comfortable with the word why. I'm going to say why a lot, because I want you to tell me. I don't want to make assumptions or inferences that may be unfounded. So tell me why. Why did you make that choice? What were you doing there? Why? And similarly, they can ask the leader the same question.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I think that's really key. I think the partnerships are key. And even among teachers, I have nothing at all. I think I have attended some really good PD sessions off campus, but I really think I usually learned better as a teacher, when my principal would give me release time and let me go observe another colleague. And some of it is just because it's right. It's your home district. I mean, we've all sat in PD and thought, and maybe even whispered to our colleagues, well, this wouldn't work in our district. Well, if the person down the hall's making it work, then I can probably make it work in my classroom. I think there's sometimes a little better buy-in when we learn from each other. And again, you have to know your staff. You have to build that culture, because you don't want to offend anyone to say, oh, go watch Mrs. Jones. But I really feel like we can just learn so much from observing each other, and maybe giving some of those stronger teachers a little release time to go in and observe others and do a little coaching piece there. So from the leadership standpoint, covering a classroom or having an instructional assistant cover, or that's a good cheap way to get some
Yes.
good communication and some observation going. And again, I really think it helps with that culture piece to know that we're all helping each other out.
Yeah, that's so true. We do learn better from each other, just like our students learn better if
Exactly.
it's that peer interaction and
Mhm.
peer collaboration. Great ideas. Well, I know we're getting close to ending our time. We're going to open it up to a Q&A. If there's any questions or clarification you would like from either Dr. Whitlock or Christina, you can go ahead and drop that in the Q&A. And while you're doing that, I'll just put in a plug for our 4 software components. We make things easier. There's lots of compliance things that have to happen, and lots of operational efficiencies that we know that we're responsible for on the campus and in districts. And so our whole goal as a company, which is probably about 80% former educators, so we get it, and we are trying to make it easier. So if you're interested in checking any of those products out, you can let us know. And we're so grateful for you spending the time with us today. And a big thank you to both Diana and Christina for sharing their wealth of knowledge and expertise. So any parting words from any of our panelists?
Just thank you again for the invitation, and I do appreciate working with your company, and we use your tool on a daily basis.
Yeah. Oh, well, we always want to provide the best quality service and software solutions to make your jobs easier. So thank you both for
Thank you.
helping
Yes.
today, and we look forward to the next webinar series.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks everyone for
Have a
taking the
great
time.
day.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.